Which is why it's so weak and so bad at pushing its message. They really keep trying to farm you, no success, and you... What? Do you end up with the next mayor of New York City? I know. I think it's dangerous and deadly for government officials to be telling people to disregard federal officers. Very dangerous. What are you talking about? At what point do you think it's appropriate for people to say, hey, some of these rules that these guys are designing are not actually legal at all, and you don't need to follow illegal orders just because someone is wearing a badge if they're completely outside of their... Like, here, I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm a senator, okay? And I tell my constituents, hey, if a cop comes to your home and they don't have a warrant and they decide to break your door and they decide to, like, I don't know, physically or sexually assault your wife or your daughter or something, you can defend yourself. Do you think I'm actually creating chaos? Do you think I'm actually creating chaos? Do you think I'm actually telling someone that you know they're in the wrong? You do realize that in that situation, the law enforcement officer is the one that's actually violating the law. Your logic is not sound. Sexual assault is completely different than what's going on. First of all, ironically enough, I use sexual assault as an example specifically because it's not that different from what's going on. It has been going on. That's number one. There are numerous instances where ICE agents have actually sexually assaulted people in their custody. And not only that, but also it's not a very extreme example. If you think that that's extreme, then you probably should actually be on my side on this argument because it's something that has been happening and it's something that has happened already. So that's number one. And number two, the reason why I use that is because I want to test out what your boundaries are. You know what I mean? I want to see like if there is a point that you would say no to. And I'm glad that you and I agree that sexual assault is actually extreme. So you and I should probably be on the same side on this issue, considering that is clearly something that you find to be a bridge too far, and ICE has been doing that. So maybe we should actually scale them back pretty significantly and maybe abolish it in its entirety. And not just because of sexual assault, but because the entire principle that it hinges on is also bullshit. I like that, though. I like that, you know, we could find agreement quickly. There are ways to protest this scenario, and rational and harming federal officers and preaching that cause chaos is not the way. Yeah, I don't want chaos, which is why we're protesting ICE presence in these streets, because ICE is the one that's creating chaos. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk again. Okay? That's 2 in a row. All right. Let's blast off. Let's blast off and let's get started. There's a lot going on, okay? There is a lot going on in the world. Got to get to it and got to talk about it as always, okay? But yeah, this morning I woke up and I worked out. I do have, I don't know. I just don't sleep too well as of late. I don't know what it is. And we'll watch TAFs too. Yes, TAFs we'll watch as well. Don't worry. Oh, damn. That's a really good blast off meme. That's funny. I should have used that one. This one is funny. I haven't been sleeping too well, and I don't know what the reason for it is. I need to lock in. I need to lock in on my sleep. Okay. Lack of doing shit outside of streaming? What do you mean? I went to a fundraiser dinner last night, and it was interesting. It's probably the 500 milligrams of caffeine and nicotine. Sure. It's probably more than 500 milligrams if we're being serious. But maybe it's the stress. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. Okay. When I figure it out, I'll let you guys know. But in any case, we're blasting off. So let the people know that we're live. We're alive. And I hope everyone is having a wonderful time. We're going to get right into it. But before we do, here's a funny tweet. TikTok. POV, you're breaking up with me, but HasanAbi just went live.
This is what's going to happen. Okay. I'm going to keep pursuing what I'm pursuing. And because I'm doing that, it's going to take up more and more of my time, and I'm not going to be able to spend as much time with you. And even though I don't think that we should be.
You need to cut back on those horse tranquilizers. What, ketamine? You think ketamine? I'm doing ketamine, and that's the reason why I don't have a good sleep schedule? You think I'm a lot cooler than I actually am, I'm realizing. Whenever people think that I'm like partying like crazy, whenever people think that I'm partying or doing, hard drugs or anything like that is always fun, because it's like, basically you see almost every waking moment in front of almost every waking moment of my day I spend in front of the camera, and the times where I'm off the camera, I'm either sleeping or reading or watching anime or jerking off. I'm a fucking whole ass loser, dog. I do not have this incredible social life. I used to. I don't anymore. Oh yeah, this is what I was going to show you. I said, so Sharkzadeh says, China and Iran, both were empires subject to a century of humiliation and diktat. Both revolted and destroyed their old societies. Both underwent a succession. Then China abandoned the ideology for pragmatism. Iran could never let go of ideology. Look at them and look at us. And I said, Iran needs Mao Zedong thought as a joke, but also kind of not as a joke, because there is something that's like a little bit wrong about this assessment, because China never actually abandoned ideology for pragmatism. China did change with time a little bit, but it never actually let go of the ideology at all. As a matter of fact, ideology specifically highlighting Mao Zedong is seen as this plank that everyone can organize around. It's very interesting. And for people that say, oh, they're revisionist or whatever, that's not what I'm talking about. Of course they're revisionist, right? Of course they're revisionist. But he's using ideology as a stand-in for religion or the Islamic Republic, right? Like, but the difference here is that, ironically enough, like the ideology around like Marxist Leninist Maoism or Mao Zedong thought is something that they still hold on to as an organizing principle. Like it is definitely government mandated. It is definitely party mandated. They use it as a mechanism of organizing for sure, 100%. And that's precisely the reason why Deng Xiaoping, which many see as this like great reformer, also on the other side was actively bringing people back. Like at times of turmoil, in times of panic in China, or any kind of instability that existed in China, post People's Republic of China, they've always gotten back to Mao Zedong. They use Mao Zedong as a way to maintain party discipline and ideological commitment, and seemingly society is very much on board with that. So yeah, all the stuff I'm thinking about quite a bit, because I'm reading the Philip Short book that I have been recommending nonstop. But yeah, I said Iran needs Mao Zedong thought, and apparently Sharkzadeh was already on that. He was already on that wavelength a long time ago. I was thinking about socialism with Sufi characteristics in China circa the early 2000s. That's a crazy t-shirt to be wearing. But I guess not so crazy when you think about it. Did you see Ai Weiwei going back to China? Yes. Actually, I was going to talk about that as well. This goes back into the bracket of another major China W, like a whopping, massive, ginormous Chinese prosperity W. Ai Weiwei, who is one of the most famous critics of China and the party specifically, it has gone back to China. It is literally, I think it was because of the Israel stuff. Because I've been following his stuff. I've been following his stuff for a while. He's an artist. He's a very famous artist, and he's also a very famous China critic, right? And he's Chinese. And he spent years and years in the West, very influential, partially because he was, a Chinese dissident living in the West, famous artist. And what's really interesting is he was doing some work around Israel's genocide in Gaza. And I remember seeing his work around Israel's genocide in Gaza. And he got insanely punished for it. Like, he got censored. He got yelled at quite a bit in Europe. And I think that opened up his eyes to the reality that, all of these systems are authoritarian and you just have to look at results. There is an article about this. For those of you who don't know, I'll give you a little bit more about his background, but he's a Chinese contemporary artist and a documentarian. He's an activist. He grew up in the far northwest of China, where he lived under harsh conditions due to his father's exile. As an activist, he has been openly critical of the Chinese government and its stance on democracy and human rights. And what's really funny about it is he gave an interview to the Times, okay, to Janice Turner at the Times, and I read it. And let me tell you, his attitude shift is actually very interesting, because what he has experienced being a famous dissident of China in the West, and also the collapse of liberalism that has been coming for quite a while now, has caused him to realize that while, yes, both of these systems are authoritarian in different ways, what you must look at is the results, and that the West revolves around a lie. The freedom of speech in the West, or all of the bounties of liberal democracy, is basically a lie. And what still matters most is material conditions. Now, he doesn't use that terminology, but you can make that assessment off of what he's saying when he talks about the prosperity of China and how it's undemocratic, how China is an undemocratic system, but it's one that they will not change because they see the failures of liberalism in the West. The last time I met Ai Weiwei was in 2010 in his studio in the semi-rural outskirts of Beijing. The assistant who let me in wore a t-shirt bearing the artist's brain scan, showing 2 blood clots caused by a police beating in Sichuan. Outside of Ai's home, surveillance cameras monitored his movements and visitors. Inside, the atmosphere was embattled and electrifying. Phones were assumed tapped. Ai's blog had been taken down, yet he still tweeted defiant wind-ups of a merciless regime. Okay? Now, what's really interesting here that you must take notice is, like, this guy he is the guy that people say, oh, try that shit in China if you can. Well, he was doing it, right? Like, he is the guy who was literally doing it in China, right? Ai Weiwei always had decent politics. He was never anti-China itself or trafficked in the crazy China will fall now or China basically Nazi stuff you hear from some. No, of course not. But, like, he had reasonable critique about the mechanisms of repression in the Chinese state. Okay? He had reasonable critique. And then he experienced the West. And when he experienced the West, his reasonable critique became even more reasonable, where he realized something that I try to explain to people all the time that is very difficult for people to understand, which is that all governments are authoritarian at the end of the day, and that the neoliberal version of control, in my opinion, in my assessment, was far better than the direct authoritarianism, but partially because I grew up under the Western style of liberties and freedoms and fraternité, égalité, liberté, right? Like I have a very, like, Western attitude about this sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, the results are the results. Ai Weiwei was commissioned to reflect on Germany for Zeit magazine, but but they seemingly didn't like his reflections and killed the article, and he shared them. So this was one of the major turning points for him, but I'm jumping ahead here. Let's continue. Okay? Lately, his activism has taken on a new recklessness, I wrote then, as if goading the state to react, and a few months later it did. I was detained on trumped-up charges and interrogated for 81 days, then spent the next 4 years under effective house arrest. The man who meets me at his gated estate is in the Portuguese countryside is 68 now, but seems calmer and healthier and has shed his Buddha-like bulk. You know when a tree is in autumn. Okay, there's got to be like come on, man. Really? I mean, am I crazy? That's racist, right? That seems a little fucking racist. Like, that's crazy. Oh, this chubby Chinese man, he was Buddha-like in his bulk, and he has shed it. Ai Weiwei is literally a Western propaganda brainwashed Chinese lib, and he's not alone. China got loads of shit like him. He's nowhere near as bad as like the guys who have made an entire career off of just like routinely talking about how China is going to evaporate at a moment's notice. But yes, he has been a Chinese dissident, a very famous one, and an artist. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, is because like it's a very interesting perspective to like. Go from being a guy who was understandably critical of the state's repressive nature to turning around and being like, actually, I've seen both sides, and let me tell you, shit ain't fucking sweet here either. You know, when a tree is in autumn, when the leaves come down, he says, it looks slimmer. I moved here during lockdown, buying the holiday home of a wealthy lawyer, complete with a tennis court and pool he never uses. I am old now, he says. I need sunshine. Portugal provides it 300 days a year, unlike Berlin, where he lived for 5 years after leaving China and still has a studio, or Cambridge, where his 16-year-old son, Ailao, is at school. When we last met, a cargo of 100 million ceramic sunflower seeds was on its way through the South China Sea to fill Tate Modern's Turbine Hall, where it would make Ai Weiwei's global reputation. Now he is established as the world's foremost dissident artist, a creator of objects which provoke thought while being beautiful, playful, and exquisitely made. Today, he wants to show me his latest work, so we wend down a gravel track at a stately pace, accompanied by his Chinese assistants and two huge but gentle Alenteo mastiffs, whose names, he tells me, mean female dog and male dog, but are quite rude words in Chinese. We reach a brick structure as vast as an aircraft hangar, just finished except for the front door, which is en route from China, as is, I later discover, the one to the lavatory. The outside does not prepare you for the miraculous interior, marble floors, blah, 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 blah. Okay? All the stuff. He's setting the scene. I don't give a shit about the seasoning. I'm here to discuss a slim treatise called Ai Weiwei on Censorship. It describes his treatment by the Chinese government, which has erased all trace of him from the public sphere. This is one of the things that the Chinese government does, right? And sometimes for silly reasons. Like, I was listening to a Vox.com article about a Chinese pop star who actually had a very public breakup, and when he did this, he had this very public breakup, and they did not like it at all. That like this was a couple. They didn't like that. They didn't like what it showed, so they just like kind of censored his existence. This causes a lot of self-censorship from record labels and other social media companies as well when they're making these sorts of decisions on who to highlight or promote too. So yeah, there is that kind of like silliness, especially silliness from a Western framework where you're like, who cares, right? And it's just funny that like he's doing a reverse Yeonmi Park, basically. That's what it is, okay? And he was never as like insane as Yeonmi Park, obviously. I'm just saying that like he had understandable, reasonable criticisms of the Chinese mechanisms of control, which he was victim to in the silliness of it all in many respects. And now that he has like experienced the hypocrisy of the West, his attitude is changing. and that of his father, the romantic poet I King, a communist and a one-time friend of Mao who was nonetheless exiled as a rightist during the Cultural Revolution. Now I says China's censorship extends beyond its borders, the government pressuring art foundations and galleries to withdraw his work. He claims his zodiac heads were removed from an exhibition in Mexico City at the request of the Chinese embassy there. A scale model of I in prison, part of an artwork entitled Sacred. So I am keen to ask how he thinks Britain and the West generally should address the growing influence of China. Is it a hostile state trying to wield power via assaults on academic freedom and endemic spying? Should we worry Sir Keir Starmer has relinquished the Chagos Islands to Beijing-friendly Mauritius and is likely to approve a Chinese mega embassy, passing over sensitive cables leading to the City of London? But I's not a politician. He's an artist known for mischief, and to my surprise, rallies to his homeland's defense. China is never a hostile power. This is not a Chinese dissident rallying to his homeland's defense. From the Western perspective, this seems as a reflexive defense, okay? Because it is baked into all of us that there is this inherent mistrust of the unknown. We have this Orientalist framework that we operate off of, and we oftentimes turn around and assume that our foreign adversaries are actually up to mischief all the time, right? That they're actually doing the same shit that we're doing all around the world. That's not the case. This is not a defense of China. This is just a defense of truth. China is never a hostile power is actually correct. There have been instances throughout, modern Chinese history where they have actually engaged in war or engaged in incursions. Vietnam is a great example of this, obviously, or have taken the wrong stance, oftentimes aligning with the United States of America's foreign policy, in many circumstances, even though I don't personally appreciate it. But ultimately, that's not how foreign policy operates in China at all. Okay? Not militarily. If you look at history, England has invaded China 3 times. He describes the First and Second Opium Wars over self-sufficient China's refusal to buy British goods, and then the 1900 Boxer Uprising, where 8 nations put down an anti-foreigner Chinese rebellion that brought down the Qing dynasty and opened up China to the West. Now, I argues the situation is reversed. The world has 2 problems. One is created by capitalism. The other is a new world order where the BRIC nations, like India or even Russia, think we're tired of being slaves. Everything you enjoy is from China. He waggles his iPhone. South China Sea. Guys, we can't be doing this, okay? We can't be doing this. If the standard for great powers is set by Russia, and more importantly, the United States of America, what China is doing is not even reaching that standard, okay? The most brutal or the most ruthless thing that China does in the South China Sea is to try to bully Filipino fishermen with its Coast Guard, okay? And the reason why they do that is because the Philippines is the only country in the region that refuses to abide by any sort of dual security cooperative agreement. And so they just keep bullying them with water guns, okay, with water cannons. The standard is so silly in the way that we operate that we are here in the United States of America talking about bombing Venezuelan fishermen that are going off the coastline of Venezuela to Trinidad, and we consider that to be, just another day in American history and American foreign policy in our own backyard. And yet, we're murdering a bunch of fishermen. We've just arrested and deposed and kidnapped the leader of a sovereign nation. And meanwhile, we're going to sit here and act as though what China is doing in the South China Sea is remotely comparable to any of that. If this is how great powers operate, China is unimaginably restrained in comparison. That's simply what I'm saying. Okay? You work for the CIA, the Chinese CIA? Is that what you think? Anyway, we're tired of being slaves. Everything you enjoy is from China. He waggles his iPhone. But if China makes 1 penny, the West will make $1. So you enjoyed 40 years of globalization, and the money China accumulated rises up like water. Their level is getting high, and the West is only realizing it too late. He chuckles. History is a roller coaster. Now you've passed your peak. Enjoy going down. In 200 years, you will go up again. Does he think Westerners are softer? Much, and getting weaker and weaker. We say in China, it's hard for 3 generations of a family to be wealthy because the third, they don't even know what money means. It's automatically in their accounts. So people become a designer. He laughs. China became strong because people work hard with no holidays, not just 8 hours, but 10, 12 hours. That's how they bring their children to your British schools, Cambridge and Oxford. The West, he says, cannot take tuition fees from China and then moan when it tries to restrict academic freedom or complain about Chinese spying because you've become the underdog. You cannot compete with China, so you blame it. I ask if he cares about Taiwan, if he cares Taiwan may soon be invaded. He replies it is territorially a part of China, adding, I don't think that Taiwan has that much freedom. It's just a little puppet of the Western establishment. Likewise, although he supports the release of Hong Kong protesters such as Jimmy Lai, he doesn't believe, as a British colony, it was ever a democracy. China, as I knows, is an autocratic surveillance state that imprisons without trial and has the world's highest execution rate. Yet in his book, he writes, at its core, censorship functions in fundamentally the same way under authoritarian regimes and in so-called free societies. Also, I don't really appreciate the way that they fucking present the execution rate. They rarely ever explain who's getting executed when you hear about this kind of stuff. Back in the day, they used to. Western media used to cover how people, like how, rich people, powerful people, and even party members and local officials that were collaborating when this like corrupt scheme would get executed, right? They would say, oh my God, this guy fucking poisoned. The Chinese state has executed another person who was found criminally liable for poisoning the baby formula or whatever. And they used to do that all the time. And they used to say, look how barbaric China is. And what they failed to realize is that a lot of people were listening to that and going, wait a minute, I don't have an issue with that at all. And if you notice, they stopped covering that kind of stuff in Western news. Have you noticed? Because it's not like China has stopped capital punishment for people that they find guilty of, crimes that they consider to be very important, no matter how powerful they might be. And it's interesting that the West no longer actually mentions that capital punishment is happening. And by the way, I am anti-capital punishment. Make no mistake. I'm anti-capital punishment across the board. But it is interesting to me that people in the West now no longer cover who's getting the capital punishment. Yet in his book, he writes, at its core, censorship functions in fundamentally the same way under authoritarian regimes and in so-called free societies. Does he really think censorship is no better in the West? It is not just in China, he says, where your iPhone is listening to you. The media in the West also has strong censorship. CNN or the BBC, it doesn't matter. In China, the power is state power. But here, it can be huge companies, business, even cultural institutions. His book describes how a social media post in November 2023 resulted in the cancellation of his exhibitions in London, Paris, Berlin, and New York. What I doesn't say is that just a few weeks after Hamas killed 1,200 Israelis, he tweeted in Chinese, the sense of guilt around the persecution of the Jewish people has been at times transferred to offset the Arab world. And financially, culturally, and in terms of media influence, the Jewish community has had significant presence in the United States. Both of these things are objectively true. These positions are now, well, don't say yikes. Oh, you're memeing, right? What are we doing here? Let's be adults, okay? Don't get baited. Wasn't this just sensitivity about a recent atrocity? I says, breezily, that the situation developed absolutely with my prediction. And it's really funny because, like, this assessment, okay? This assessment is now very commonplace. This assessment is very commonplace, except if you are from not America or not the heart of the West, okay? This assessment is every unc and every aunt that is, that was born and raised in any other country but the European continent, Australia, or the United States of America. I promise you, I know we often feel as the world revolves around us because we live in the heart of empire. And in many respects, it does. Okay? But there are a lot more people that see the world with this lens, which I think is closer to a closer interpretation of the truth than what the average American believes. Okay? Wasn't this just sensitivity about a recent atrocity? I breezily says that the situation developed absolutely with my prediction. I just announced it a little earlier. He said I was right, but too early. Where once his Twitter feed rallied at the Chinese government, now on X, it is solely about Gaza. He sees the conflict as a modern test for the world to say who is defending human rights, who is defending freedom of speech. There is nobody. Only the powerless people maybe walk on the street to do little demonstrations, but they are often beaten by the state police. And that evens out the so-called free world and authoritarian state because they do the same thing. I don't really understand a lot of this, to be honest. Simply put, this is a person who experienced state censorship in China. He actually was punished for it fairly severely, okay? And for things that you would never even consider to be a serious enough slight, right? Just criticizing the government in general, criticizing censorship in and of itself. Those sorts of things you can't really do in China, okay? And as a very famous artist, he became a critic of China. He became a dissident of Chinese mechanisms of control, specifically about the Communist Party of China. The ways in which they were, stunting speech and artistic expression. This is a person who is consistent. That's what the problem is. And as a consistent person, he came to the West, as many others do, with assumptions that Westerners who wear a suit and tie and speak about how superior their culture is and how much they care about free speech. He came with those assumptions and then very quickly realized, especially when he had something to, in a moment of impact, when he actually had something that he wanted to be outspoken about, very quickly realized, oh shit, the Western notion of freedom of speech was simply also a lie. And it's no longer a hardened truth, but instead a malleable concept that unironically turns into a major problem if there's a moment of impact. Yeah, you can say things, you can call your president a pedophile in the United States of America, but God forbid you criticize ICE protests. God forbid you actually go out of your way to say maybe you shouldn't be able to fucking shoot random moms in the face, or God forbid you say something about Israel, right? You can't do that. You can't do that. That goes against the fundamentals of the First Amendment that we are supposed to abide by, that we're supposed to defend. You can do that while you lie? Really? That's interesting because someone that I know, Mahmoud Khalil, is currently being prosecuted once again after an appellate court decided to strike down his freedom for the crime of protesting against Israel's genocide. So that's really interesting that you have this notion, that you have this attitude, but on X you can say everything? Okay, dude, you're a fucking idiot. All right. We're talking about governments, chatter. We're not talking about like what you can say on X. Anyway, I balk at his false equivalence. It's not a false equivalence. But of course you think that because you're a writer at the Times. Are Western democracies, where he now happily makes art and money without surveillance or censorship, really no better than China? The project that caused the Chinese authorities to fracture a skull, necessitating life-saving brain injury, was his naming of the 5,000 children killed in poorly constructed schools during the Sichuan earthquake. Such a story would have been blown wide open by a free press. Yeah, and what would happen in the aftermath? What would happen in the aftermath? Because when things like that happen, the Chinese government cracks down on dissidents, okay? But then you know who else they crack down on? The people that actually participated in the shoddy construction. In America, you can say that these schools are actually built shoddily, okay? I mean, you can say we got lead poisoning happening in our schools, that our public schools are crippled, they're not being funded. But who gets punished? Now, this isn't whataboutism, because I am someone who appreciates that you can say those things. But the reality of the matter is, when you take yourself out of the equation, when you remove your own personal feelings from the equation, and you ask the question, at the end of the day, what matters more? The government actually stamping out those who are engaging in this level of corruption, but then also not allowing people to fucking have a say in the process? Or the government that allows people to have a say in the process, but then does not do anything about the corrupt forces? Okay? And that's the problem. I think you can have both. I think you can have free speech and also do Chinese-style crackdowns on those who are actually corrupt. You don't have to choose between the two. I don't believe you have to choose between the two. That's what I want. I want both. But if you were to ask the average person, your biggest flaw, okay, well, it's a little, that is unironically, unimaginably hypocritical of me to fucking turn around and be like, listen, I don't care about free speech at all. Like, come on. It's a big part of the reason why I'm able to say what I'm saying. And I do think that there is at least like an attitude shift that I've been able to contribute to specifically around the issue of Israel and Palestine due to, I guess, the American laissez-faire attitude about free speech. Toxically charitable and HasanAbi, name a better duo. Remember, the new naming Twitter is giving consent to the power that the lone scum has on you, chatters? What? Okay. What about Julian Assange in your British custody? Almost 12 years hiding in the embassies, he says. Or Edward Snowden, still hiding in Russia. Many believe he's a Putin asset, I say. At this, I, unused to being challenged, gets exasperated. You're interviewing an artist, he says. Now you want to talk about politics? I'm interested in your opinion. I hope you can publish it. Again, immediately, this person is like, let me dunk on you. Edward Snowden is a Russian asset? Edward Snowden had to become a Russian asset, okay? For survival. The American government wanted to kill him. The American government openly fantasized about killing Julian Assange. Edward Snowden is an American patriot, okay? It is so silly and so strange that these people turn around and have the audacity to entertain the notion that America actually values free speech, and then the moment of contradiction arrives and they say, excuse me, they're actually an enemy of the state. What do you think the Chinese state says about political dissidents? They use the same logic. It's not like the Chinese state, when they're cracking down on political dissidents, goes, these guys are actually very good people, and we want to prosecute them justifiably because we're evil. It's the same logic. This is the problem. These people don't understand it. When you automatically say, well, Edward Snowden is a Russian dissident. I mean, come on, he's a Russian asset, right? Like what do you think? What do you think is the reason why you're saying that? You're saying that because you're a regime defender. At least between these two places, China is more honest about its surveillance mechanism. China is more honest about what you can and can't do. In America, we're not so honest about it. And I think that's the whole point of what Ai Weiwei is saying here. He probably would have been able to say that if he, was a little bit more invested in like politics or fully fleshed it out, rather than just like having a consistent moral position on authoritarianism and censorship, and just like experiencing it personally, both in China, but then also in the West as well. I know this is unrelated to the issue at hand, but let's avoid calling Assange a Chad because he's a rapist. He was persecuted due to American lack of freedom of speech and brutality, yes, but he doesn't deserve our sympathy as an individual. First of all, he was not. That was not. No, that was a fake charge that you're leaning into, chatter, that the American government was like concocting. The charges were dropped. And not only that, but he was also tortured in the process. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that, like, I mean, I might be mistaken, or you might be mistaken, but I'm fairly certain that was like the governments of the West trying to find anything they could to disparage Julian Assange. I mean, there are obviously things you can say about Julian Assange, like, oh, he was like very anti-Hillary Clinton, very anti-Democratic Party, and perhaps a little too silly about MAGA initially and what Trump represented initially. And I think that is true. A lot of those guys become cranks, but he very quickly realized that Trump is also a danger, and just the same like imperialist that the Democratic Party was representing and Hillary Clinton was representing. But yeah, no, he's. I think he is one of those cases. He's one of those like very clear examples of just Western hypocrisy. They didn't like that he was revealing certain things, and that's it. He's not like Greenwald. No, I don't think. I don't think he's like Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald still maintains that position. Anyway. Like all political exiles, Ike clearly has a complex relationship with his homeland. His childhood was spent at the edge of the Gobi Desert, an area known as Little Siberia, where his father was forcibly re-educated by being made to clean communal latrines. The family lived in a subterranean animal shelter without light, plagued by lice and rats. In his fascinating memoir, 1,000 Years of Joy and Sorrows, he recalls his father being paraded before a barracking crowd, wearing a dunce's hat, head bowed. Yet even then, I Ching never stopped loving his country, writing elegiac patriotic poems after Mao's death. The party admitted he'd been wrongly accused. He and his work were rehabilitated. One of the consequences of the Cultural Revolution that was certainly, I mean, not great, right? Reads like Aiden Ross. You think Aiden Ross knows how to read? That's crazy. 28-month subscriber to try to get a dunk on me. Literally just fantasizes about Aiden Ross being literate. That's funny, though. Elegiac. Elegiac? Yeah, there's definitely a lot of L's in the Cultural Revolution. Let's be real. Oh, it's like a elegy? Okay. The key to his art, Little Acts of Mischief. His teenage years coincided with the easing of state control, a sense of broadening possibility. But at art school, he found his fellow students pretentious and privileged. He writes, I soon learned I did not fit in with the new post-Mao order any more than I had fitted in with the Maoist order that had shaped or deformed my childhood. So, one of the first Chinese permitted to study abroad, he left for New York with just $30. Too cussed to take his exams, he lost his scholarship and made money by cleaning houses or sketching street portraits. Not a good place to spend your youth, he says. You know, crazy. Although fascinated by Western art, especially Andy Warhol, in 12 years he barely sold a work. In 93, when his father was ailing, he returned to China, and seeing his country with fresh eyes, he found himself as an artist. Following 22 years until he went into exile were my best moment, even if I was being put through many trials. As Beijing became one gigantic building site, diggers exhumed ancient artifacts which, in a society that erased its own history, had no value. I bought mountains of jade, pottery, and ancient furniture, trying to figure out how it was made. The internet was in its infancy, and the Chinese authorities did not yet understand its subversive power. Ai's art was born of little acts of mischief, like painting the Coca-Cola logo on a 2,000-year-old urn, or photographing himself giving the finger at Tiananmen Square. They have weapons, they have military and police, he says, but the only thing they don't know how to deal with is humor. This is Low Kirk. One of the aspects, no offense, but I feel like you would be scared of popcorn reading, comrade. What do you mean? What's popcorn reading? What is happening? Guys, you know I read articles every single day on this broadcast, right? Reading aloud? I don't know what popcorn reading is. I didn't grow up here. where you get called in class to read. I read to a stadium full of people every fucking day. What is going on? I don't want to hear this kind of attitude from monolinguists. They don't do popcorn reading in Turkey. I don't even know what that concept is. I don't really understand it. Is this because of Kai Cenat? Is that why? Like, because Kai started reading books and everyone is now being like hyper aware and hyper alert about how other people are reading? So now they're realizing that like there are certain words that like, of course, I don't know how to read as well. And I just have to sound it out, especially considering that English is my second language and that it's one of the worst sounded out languages out there. They're bullying you for mispronouncing photographing. Am I saying it wrong? Did I say photographing? Is that what happened? Abi kitap okuyorlar ya derste, okullarda yüksek sesle. Ha işte tamam popcorn. Biz ama ona popcorn reading mi diyorduk yani? Hayır. Ben bu arada 34 yaşındayım yani. O derslerden o kadar yıl yani 20 sene oldu öyle bir dersi göreli ben. Two decades. Popcorn reading is when I read a paragraph or so and then the teacher calls on another person in class to pick it up where I left off. All right, whatever. Hayır da Amerikalılar diyormuş böyle. Amerikalıların götüne koyayım. Hiçbir şey bilmiyorlar. Bırak. Dal yarak. Amerikalılar. Salak hepsi. Sadece bir tane dil konuşabiliyorlar. Ondan sonra bir de orospu çocukları bıdır bıdır laf ediyorlar. Gelsin bakayım Türkiye'de Türkçe konuşsun. 30 bin tane adama. Türk politikasını anlatmaya çalışsın amına koduklarım. Yapamazlar. He's calling us stupid? Yes, I am. I am doing that literally in Turkish. Anyway, although untrained, he set up an architectural practice. Fake, designing calm, simple buildings in contrast to the Bling Towers replacing old Beijing. He was invited to help design what became the Bird's Nest Stadium for the 2008 Olympic Games, but his growing disgust with the government meant he never visited it. The Sichuan earthquake enraged him because the government refused to release or even collect the dead children's names, so he and volunteers went door to door to record them. He used children's backpacks to write in Chinese characters on the outside of the Haus der Kunst Museum in Munich, a mother's words. She lived happily in this world for 7 years. I's work often presents small, identical objects en masse. The backpack Sunflower sees his recent works made with Lego with curiously moving results. It is hard not to think of a nameless, indistinguishable Chinese workers, either under Mao or toiling in soulless iPhone factories now. We sit in I's folly at a beautiful Chinese table where an assistant brings green tea. Above us is a camouflage net, but if you look carefully, the dark patches are images of cats. Playful, clever eye. He made it for an exhibition in Ukraine, which he has visited 3 times during the war. Yet he rarely puts his work on his studio walls. To him, the process of making art is what matters, not the end product. You know, you eat something, you digest, then later you go to the toilet. You just flush it away into a gallery. This process, he says, is how humans figure out meaning. Yet artificial intelligence can deliver a perfect end result in seconds. That kind of technology will collapse the learning process, the wondering who we are. If we know everything, we become nobody. Make these Americans read in Turkish, please. Actually, reading in Turkish is much easier to sound out sounds because it has a phonetic consistency, whereas English does not. So once you realize how certain sounds are supposed to be read, it's much easier to read in Turkish. You do need to learn how the letters sound, but unfortunately in English there is no such phonetic consistency, so it's very difficult to learn. Especially if you forget how like certain words sound, or if you encounter a new word for the first time ever, you're going to have issues. Yeah, Pacific Ocean. Every C is pronounced different. Thanks, English. And also, you get W's and V's mixed up nonstop. Okay, well, we don't have the W sound or the W letter in Turkish. In the Turkish alphabet, the W letter does not exist. And this is precisely the reason why that was something that I consistently fail at doing even to this day, although English is my second language, but it's basically like a native tongue for me. I still sometimes have a hard time saying or have to really, really lock in every time I say something like Volkswagen. Virgin wedding. Like if there is a V and a W in the same, in the same sentence, it gets hard. Did I say it wrong? Volkswagen. No, I didn't say it wrong. Volkswagen. Amına koyayım, Amerika'ya ilk geldiğimde her third dediğimde amına kodumun Angloidler third dediğimi sanıyordu. Yeah, third and turd. Volkswagen. Volkswagen is how we say it in Turkish. Volkswagen. Volkswagen. See? Much easier. Much easier to say. Vos de geç. This process, yeah, it's like L and R's in Japanese. Yeah, the L sound. This process, he says, is how humans figure out meaning, yet artificial intelligence can deliver a perfect end result in seconds. On my tombstone, it will say, I'm such a failure. Anyway, so he just, Ilau says he doesn't want his father's money, which will be a substantial fortune. I ask I if he feels guilty. He's so rich. He makes me repeat the question while he films it. Then he says his son's whole life's work is worth less than one recently sold Klimt, or what a Silicon Valley magnate makes in a week. On my tombstone, it will say, I'm such a failure, he says. He doesn't care what will happen to his work after his death. I can give to an institution or I can burn it. I don't care about the money. But you never have an issue with P? That's not in Turkish either? No, the letter P does exist in Turkish. It doesn't exist. My last name is Piker. The letter P, of course, exists in Turkish. You're thinking of Arabic. Peki, Piker, porno, pamuk. You are fascist? Do you like Benito Mussolini? You are fascist. No, I am an anti-fascist. I'm the opposite of that. Professor, Pokemon. That's how you say Pokemon in Turkish. Pokemon. Is Turkish gendered? No, the Turkish language is gender neutral. It is not a gendered language at all. It's completely woke. It's completely gender neutral. Another reason why it's actually much easier to learn. But yeah, so the point is, he got clapped on numerous occasions, and he's obviously primed. He's obviously much more primed to be aware of censorship in authoritarian or seemingly non-authoritarian governments. And therefore, when he experienced this pushback, you know what's really funny, by the way? Zay Squirrel says, Ai Weiwei actually has principles. He's not a pathetic puppet that can be paraded around in front of the New York Times. Yeah, because he's saying this. He was outspoken about Gaza, okay? Like, if you ask Ai Weiwei his attitude about, like, I don't know, the Islamic Republic, I'm sure Zay Squirrel would have a very different attitude about how much of a fucking Western puppet Ai Weiwei actually is, okay? You can't celebrate people's consistency and then also demonstrate inconsistency in certain instances. Let's move on. There are those of us who also try to maintain some semblance of consistency while being consistently anti-imperialist and get fucking yelled at quite a bit. Anyway, a society governed by regulations yet lacking individual moral judgment is more dangerous than one with none at all. A society that values obedience without questioning authority is destined to become corrupt. A society that admits to error but refuses to reflect on its origins possesses a mind as stubborn and dull as granite. Here, at a deserted street, people stop dutifully at a red light, not a car in sight. This, I once thought, is the mark of a highly evolved society. At the heart of bureaucracy lies a collective endorsement of power's legitimacy, and therefore individuals surrender their moral judgment, or perhaps never develop one. They abandon challenge. They relinquish dispute. When conversation becomes avoidance, when topics must not be mentioned, we are already living under the quiet logic of authoritarianism. When the majority believe they live in a free society, it is often a sight that society is not free. Freedom is not a gift. It must be wrestled from the hands of banality and the quiet complicity with power. This was after Ai Weiwei was commissioned to reflect on Germany for Zeit magazine, but they seemingly didn't like this reflection and killed the article. So he shared them nonetheless. When people sense that power is beyond challenge, they redirect their energy into trivial disputes, and those trivialities collectively are enough to erode a society's very foundations of justice. When public events of great consequence, such as the Nord Stream pipeline bombing, are met with silence from both government and media, the silence itself becomes more terrifying than an atomic bomb, than any atomic bomb. These are arguably pretty common views of foreigners in Germany. Zeit have managed to make it more interesting and make it the fact that it wasn't printed the most interesting thing about it. And then this person goes, the claim that the Nord Stream bombing was met with silence by the government and the media is just one of those examples that a lot that isn't standard gripes, but simple delusions detached from fact. They should have published it. It makes them look pretty bad and clueless. Which James responds to with, a very clear case of missing the point and proving him right about the Slavish loyalty. Have the German government treated the bombing of their infrastructure by a foreign state like an act of war? Once again, it is slavish. I know, slavish. See, this is what I was saying about the inconsistent phonetics in the English language. Okay? ESL. Also, isn't that where the word slave comes from, according to some people? That's what they say. Reread point 1. A society governed by regulations yet lacking individual moral judgment is more dangerous than one with none at all. What do you mean? So, the point is that we have this we have our own version of self-censorship. As someone who experienced self-censorship from others in China for the brief time that I was there, and then also recognizes how self-censorship works in the West, this is one of those versions of it. The social stigma surrounding certain truths that you cannot say, certain things that you cannot address. Okay, in this supposedly free society. When you come from that background, when you come from a country where, certain things are not allowed to be said and you will get punished by the government, even if you find them to be silly rules and restrictions, and then you come into the Western world and you realize that, sure, maybe you don't have that same level of serious repression, serious crackdowns when you say silly things, but you absolutely do experience a social stigma that creates an environment of self-censorship in order not to, offend, in order not to come across like you are not a part of the in-group. But then beyond that, the real censorship, state-enforced censorship that comes when you actually do say something of consequence at a time when the government is actively trying to stop you from saying it, you realize it's not so different than these more authoritarian countries at all. Okay? Just as though in China, you can say whatever the fuck you want about whatever different thing you want to say, as long as you don't criticize Xi Jinping too much, or, make jokes about him, or make jokes about Mao Zedong, or numerous other, party officials or whatever. You can say whatever the fuck you want. You just can't say certain things. So it creates an environment of self-censorship. In the United States of America, you can say whatever the fuck you want. You can call the president a pedophile, right? You can call the president a pedophile all day, every day. You might get fired. But the moment that you say something about Israel at a time when it's inopportune for the government, at a time when the government is not fond of you saying anything at all about Israel, Joe Biden will arrest 3,500 student protesters at peaceful college encampments. Okay? He did that. He did do that. That's how it goes. I'm not saying that the Chinese method here is better, for the record. I'm not saying that at all. I need you to understand. Okay? I'm simply bringing up the Western hypocrisy as one who is a major recipient of these attacks, especially as one who has been on the receiving end of an endless barrage of hatred for the last 2 years for maintaining a consistent anti-fascist and consistent anti-genocide principle and not shying away from saying what I truly mean and what I truly believe. I have been yelled at endlessly. And I still do get yelled at endlessly. Now, of course, that yelling did create an environment of censorship. That is precisely the reason why. That is precisely the reason why some of these people that otherwise would have been outspoken did not speak out about what they had seen. This is what I mean when I say there is an environment of social stigma associated with certain subjects. You think all of these people didn't realize that Israel was doing horrible things to Palestinians? Of course they did. But they saw what happened to people who spoke out. So they engaged in this self-censorship. They didn't want to speak about it until the crowd grew and you would no longer get punished in that crowd, because there is obviously power in numbers, right? Same goes for speaking out against ICE. Same goes for speaking out against reactionary politics in general. It happens in a much smaller version in places like Twitch, where if the only thing that you see, the loud proclamations that you hear over and over again come from the right, and anyone that actually says, hey, this seems a little strange, I don't really like it, maybe we shouldn't be, so homophobic or transphobic. Maybe we shouldn't be saying that immigrants are rapists that need to be purged from the boundaries of the state. And you get pummeled, you get punished. And you don't often even get directionally punished for that reason, for what you're saying. They just come after you and they find whatever they can, endlessly harassing you over and over again, creating this cycle where you are punished for speaking out against what these people want to design as the popular opinion. Same goes for Twitter. Okay? Same thing happened in Twitter. Same thing happened on Twitch. It's changing now, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. Woke 2.0. It's coming back, baby. It's coming back. But one of the things that I meant, one of the things that I talked about yesterday was this environment of censorship that invites self-censorship for others. If you have an opinion about Palestine, you think twice about saying something when one of the most outspoken critics of Israel is constantly getting called a terrorist. And not just even a terrorist, but constantly getting yelled at for a litany of different things as well. It doesn't just stay there, right? It moves into every other orifice. It moves into every other direction. And that system of self-censorship or direct government censorship is reinforced by people who openly stake their reputation on this, their power that they openly reveal, the power that they openly reveal they have, the partnerships that they engage with. Here is Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League talking about your boy, me, HasanAbi Piker, at a synagogue in Los Angeles.
The rising anti-Zionism on the left is by people on the left. So what I try to do at ADL, what we try to do, is to provide data, is to provide tools, is to step up, but often quietly behind the scenes. It doesn't help I don't think it helps the Jewish people, and it doesn't disarm them when I go after Nick Fuentes or Hasan Piker, a revolting person. They should call him Hamas Piker. He's here in LA, and he's just a putrid, says horrible, slanderous things about Jews, about Zionists, about Israel.
This man is an agent of a foreign nation state. Okay? Straight up. This man is an agent for the state of Israel. Okay? He might run a supposed civil rights organization in the United States of America as an American citizen, but his job is to defend the nation state of Israel. His job is to take out critics of the state of Israel. Not by killing them, of course. We haven't gotten that far, right? But by doing everything in their power, doing everything in his power, but doing everything in the state's power as well to tarnish, tar and feather, and deplatform critics of Israel. And it's not like he's hiding it. He's openly stating it. And here he is talking about how he's collaborating with members on the left to take out people on the left who are anti-Zionist, people like myself, people like many others. And what's interesting about that, like I said, is when he says he's working with the left to do so. Now, he might just mean Richie Torres, one of my other ops, who is, a Democrat in New York. Okay? He might mean just that. Or maybe he means other people too. Maybe he's talking about all of these other people that have spent the last 2 years not really saying anything about Gaza, but instead spending every waking moment talking about critics of Israel by bringing up irrelevant drama that they cultivate, manufacture. Something to consider for those who are not aware of how this kind of stuff works. Okay? If they cannot address your arguments, they will slander you. If they cannot address your points and deliver counterpoints, if they've lost the argument, the only thing they can do is first slander you, keep you preoccupied with a litany of different, sequences of drama, slander your reputation for the public so that people consider you to be a toxic person, right? And then if that doesn't work either, you just go for the deplatforming. And he's openly stating it.
Israel.
And has a big platform.
Yeah, so you might not know Hasan Piker, but if your kids are watching video games, you better believe they do. Because on Twitch and on Steam, he's everywhere, let alone on YouTube and Insta. So anyways, long story short, we definitely are working a lot to try to get the platforms to kind of enforce their own terms of service so that we can pull down the most offensive hate speech or get them to do it.
Yeah. I know a lot of people focus on the silly stuff here, but this is a serious fucking threat, right? If you care about free speech as an American, this is a serious threat. This is an agent of a foreign nation state working at the behest of a foreign nation state, undermining the American First Amendment. It's ridiculous. It's not like he's hiding it. I know. Calling you a gamer is the real slander. But the point I'm trying to make here is that these attempts are attempts that I've had to deal with for the last 2 years, almost 3 years now, right? And I say attempts because they haven't really been all that successful. But they still continue, okay? They still continue nonetheless. So you have to be a little bit more careful when you hear about someone that you otherwise agree with or you might find yourself in agreement with get fucking slandered up and down the timeline. There might be a different purpose for that. That's all I'm saying. You see what I mean? It's interesting because Ben Rhodes is one of these guys. Ben Rhodes played a role in writing out the design for JCPOA, the Iran Denuclearization Agreement, under the Obama administration, and he was public enemy number one. He was attacked ruthlessly by the exact same fake newspapers that I get criticized by, that I get attacked by, that I get slandered by the exact same institutions. And the reason for that was because Obama dared to do something that Israel didn't want the American government to do. He engaged in talks with Iran and successfully got Iran to commit to denuclearization in exchange for sanctions relief and normalizing relations with Iran. Israel didn't like that at all. Benjamin Netanyahu came to the United States of America and delivered a speech to Congress where he got standing ovations once again, a sight that we've already seen time and time again, a sight that we've seen under the Biden administration and under the Trump administration as well. He was able to do that because Israel gets to do that. Israel gets to do that every single fucking day. Okay? If America has a different design for what they want to do in the region, Israel can just come and punish you. Israel can come and punish the people that played a role in this design and do everything in their power. What is this? Well, why can I come in here at any given time and Asman has 10K plus more views? The world is healing. Instant deletes now, huh? Must be a rough time in here. 10K plus views at any given time. Crazy. Damn, dude, how does Asman have so much more viewers than you at any given point? I mean, it's like 20K by now. I like that you even noticed that the number of viewership increase, regardless of the botting, right? Regardless of the view bots, has actually diminished, has decreased, and yet you still do not understand that the attitude is changing, that the times are changing, my friend. I unbanned you, by the way. Live tune in on Candace. Fuck yeah, she had 200K last stream. Might get me of that. Watch Candace. She got 200K viewers right now. You keeping up with Candace? Thoughts on Alberta's referendum from Canada? Oh, God, another Albertan hog. We're clandestine operators in here, chatter. I thought you didn't know that. Why did Capitol allow for Obama to treat Iran and Israel as he did? If they didn't, why did Obama want to oppose Capitol? What do you mean? In terms of foreign policy, you can have disagreements on how you might conduct your affairs. That's normal. There's going to be disagreements. Israel wants to completely destabilize Iran. America might have a different attitude about completely destabilizing Iran because they have to factor in the opinions of other Gulf states that are vassalized as well, whether it be Saudi Arabia or the UAE, and what kind of danger that presents. And they might move in the direction of stability in the region by collaborating with Iran. Like, there's going to be disagreements there. Ultimately, it's still at the behest of domination, but you might have a different method, right? You might have a different method of domination, a different method of controlling the region. The goal is still to control the region, however. Whether you put Palestinians in concentration camps and send them into ovens, or whether you eviscerate them with drone strikes and regular bombing campaigns, the methods are different, but the outcome is the same. Both are different versions of a Holocaust, but yet it's still a genocide. Does that make sense? It doesn't change the reality as a genocide. Both are mechanized versions of slaughter, wholesale slaughter of an ethnic population, of an indigenous population that must be purged for the state's desires. Oh my God, China allows visa-free access for Canadian visitors. Are you fucking kidding me? There's never been a better moment to be Canadian. Stop dabbing on us, Canada. Okay. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to mention outside of this, outside of the ADL situation, was I wonder who the other actors are here that have spent every waking moment attacking not Israel for doing a genocide, but instead its critics for whatever kind of manufactured drama. I wonder who those people are. I think you guys all know who those fucking people are and the many different ways that they've tried to do this, right? In any case, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention here, of course, and that is this attitude that some liberals engage in still to this day. This is another failed attempt to stigmatize certain positions, and I think it's not only inappropriate because the time for this kind of engineering is gone. Okay, I'm going to show you one example of Republicans engineering social dynamics and trying to create an environment of stigma around certain points of view. I'm going to show you how Israel does this as well, still does this, but to a much lesser degree or much less effective way. And then I'm also going to show you how liberals engage in this kind of silliness too. Hold on. The liberal version of this, of course, is something that I tweeted out specifically around this. Hasan also refuses to endorse the candidate that would have prevented all of this, so I'm not sure why he thinks he has much of a moral high ground here, especially when I'm talking about, Joe Rogan acting all silly about not knowing that Trump was going to do mass deportations. When a liberal sees this statement from me, okay, Hasan reacts to Trump's Gestapo tactics finally dawning on Joe Rogan. The answer is yes, dumbass. You knew this was going to happen. Trump campaigned on this, and you endorsed him. This liberal turns around and still finds a way to blame one of the few people on the left side that was actively warning the Democratic Party not to do certain things that they did. Hasan also refused to endorse a candidate that would have prevented all of this, so I'm not sure why he thinks he has much of a moral high ground here. To which I responded with, libs trying to do this in 2026 can't be serious. I warned the Dems in person at the DNC about the dangers of letting anti-immigrant rhetoric go unchecked. They got cold feet when they saw a couple mass deportation polls and totally conceded to the right. Now here we are. Okay? If your attitude is to prevent atrocities like the ones that are happening currently, then you have to hold your politicians to account. And I did that to the best of my ability. I try to work with the one party that is more malleable and is supposed to be closer to my worldview because I care about outcomes. I care about policies. I care about people. The Democratic Party, it's not a secret, is far closer to my worldview than the Republican Party is. They're still blaming the color commentator during the basketball game for not begging the audience to root hard enough for the home team instead of the team for not doing what it needed out on the court. Pathetic. I like that. That's actually a really good analogy. Holy shit. And for the record, what these guys want, and I've played this game before, what these guys want is full fealty, okay? Because the non-endorsement situation here, I stand by 100%, okay? I stand by that, absolutely. Especially because I warned everyone about what Donald Trump, the dangers of Donald Trump and what Donald Trump represented. And I warned the Democrats, if they did not sufficiently address some of these problems, that a lot of people were not going to vote for them. And turns out I was fucking right. And perhaps that's the reason why so many of these like adult outlets run by adults, recognize that, there was differing opinions out there that they did not actually address at all. I'm taking the long way home to explain that I was fucking right. And many of the other places you went to for this information, self-soothing lullabies that you fucking heard over and over again with the assumptions that Kamala Harris had this locked down, they were wrong. And instead of recognizing why you were wrong or why you were deluded and then hopefully not repeating that mistake, you still try to crash out on those who were right. Evergreen? Yeah. Oh, this is so bad. This is how you know she crushed it. Yeah. She crushed it so hard. This was on the DNC speech. This guy also is one of my major haters as well. There's like these liberals, CN liberalism. I have a constituency of Twitter liberal posters who just professionally despise everything that I do and everything that I represent. They not only hate me, but now they even hate the Podjons for aligning with someone such as myself and aligning with the Bernie wing of the party in an effort to defend American democracy, in an effort to actually save this fucking country. But these guys do not have that investment at all. They're just party loyalists for some weird reason. Some of them are paid. Some of them are not even paid. Some of them do it for free. They're just professionally wrong. I don't understand it. I don't understand what it will take for these guys to recognize that they're wrong all the fucking time. Now, that's one aspect of this, failed attempt at censorship as well, or the failed attempt to try and punish people for having a differing opinion, even if those people are correct and the people doing the yelling are incorrect. The other way that Israel, for example, does it is this article, right? With the exception of Ro Khanna, none of these lawmakers responded to the request for comment about Piker's latest post on Hamas, nor did the Pod Save America hosts, including John Lovett, John Favreau, Dan Pfeiffer, and Tommy Vitor. This article is from the Jewish Insider. Okay? Hasan Piker doubles down on Hamas support while maintaining progressive credibility by Matthew Cassell. His remarks unequivocally siding with Hamas provide clarifying insight into Piker's worldview, raising questions about the permission structure in the broader progressive movement that tolerates such views. Stop aligning with this guy. Don't listen to him. Don't allow him don't allow him into your groups, not realizing that I am opening up my platform to many of these people. Okay? It's not the other way around. It's literally the other way around. Imagine writing an article about Theo Von, such as this one. Liberals tried for a very long time. Big part of the reason why they kept fucking losing. Did the writer reach out to you for comment? Fuck no. Also, I would never respond to a comment for the Jewish Insider, an outlet that is specifically designed to cut propaganda such as this one. So, I replied to it on Twitter saying, remember when you guys tried to do this with Zoran and no one gave a shit and he's the mayor of New York City now? Not sure how this childish scolding over flattened commentary is going to make Americans under the age of 35 pro-Israel again. Okay? It's not, by the way. It's just not going to work, and it hasn't worked. But they still try it nonetheless. God damn it, dude. Fucking paywall remover is not working. Oh, here it is. Hopefully nope. All right, well, I'm not going to fucking read it then. Who gives a shit? If we can't remove the paywall, then we don't.